Hey everybody, how you doing? It is I, the Terrorific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy. Welcome to Retro Horror School Talks, where I bring guests on kicking and screaming and against their will to gush about retro horror and horror-related topics. And with me, he's been on the show not once, not twice, now his third time, David Weiner, the writer and director of the In Search of Darkness 80s, In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994, and the upcoming In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. So, welcome back. It's good to have you here again.
Hey, listen, I love when you show my product so I don't have to do it. That's great. I appreciate your support, and I'm always happy to chat with you, and I always appreciate your interest and your audience's interest as well.
Yeah, and it's good to have you back. We both forgot that it was Mother's Day. It's like, uh-oh.
Happy Mother's Day to all the moms, including Mrs. Voorhees.
Yes, absolutely. So for everybody who may not know, because there may be some people tuning in or watching this that don't know about what In Search of Darkness is, give a little, talk a little bit generally about what In Search of Darkness is and what it covers.
Yeah, In Search of Darkness is now a series of long-form crowd-funded documentaries about horror. And they are all long-form in that they are anywhere between 4 to 6 hours long. The most recent one we did was 6 hours when you include the credits. And we take icons and legends of the era who were in the movies, who made the movies in front of the camera, behind the camera, experts, special effects people, composers, you name it. If they were part of this era where we did 3 for the 80s, now we're doing the 90s. We did part 1, doing part 2, obviously with the title 90 to 94. Now I'm working on 95 to 99. The idea is I talk to everybody, and not only do they talk about their own projects, but they talk about the stuff that they love and the movies that they love. So it's like a big, warm, nostalgic celebration with lots of information and infotainment about horror. So if you're a newcomer, there's a huge amount to chew on. If you are an old seasoned pro, you'll be like, yeah, I know that, but that's cool. I never heard that little nugget. Oh, it's cool to see that they got these people together to talk about it again and put it in new context 30 years later from the 90s or longer for the 80s. And we talk about movies where it's divided into years. So in each year, we curate a list of 10, 15 movies where we talk about each and every one. And then in between, there's larger context chapters about special effects and the music and the zeitgeist of the time and what was happening in the world that was being reflected by horror on screen. And these are labors of love, and I have an amazing team that works on these, but I write them and I direct them.
And they are awesome. I came in pretty late in the game. I came in Search of Darkness 80s Volume 3, but ever since then, I've been hooked. I've pretty much been a ride or die for Creator VC and In Search of Darkness. So,
can I ask you a quick question about that?
Yeah, sure.
So A, do you remember how you heard about it? And B, if you started with part 3, what was it like when you sort of went to part 1 and part 2 in comparison? I'm going to interview you, actually.
Oh, you're flipping it back on me. Well, at the time, I was on Twitter, and I saw someone else post about In Search of Darkness. So it got me curious. And I saw a trailer about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I am utterly hooked. So it was like word of mouth was how I first heard of it. And starting from the last one and going backwards was an interesting experience. But I didn't feel that it was disjointed, like in that fact. Starting at 3 didn't ruin my enjoyment of 1 and 2.
Yeah, it just got collectively more mainstream by the time you got to the first one, in terms of, because the first one, for people, again, the uninitiated, the first one, we weren't sure if we were going to get to do more. And so, and because it's crowdfunded, we get to do it in one long stretch. So when it's really, really long, it's a bit of a shock to the system for some people who
Yeah.
are intimidated by the runtime. But you would see that these are really, really well edited by Samuel Wade, my editor for the first three, and Alex Townley, who's now doing the 90s. These things fly by, and they're easy to sort of hit pause and come back later or the next day or whenever you want to. But yeah, they started out very mainstream, and because there were so many movies in the 80s to choose from, I whittled it down to North American films for the first one, got more international with Italian films and other films around the world. And by the time we got to the third one, it was really kind of the dusty shelves and the leftovers of the mainstream ones that we didn't get to. That's important to mention because by the time I did part three, I learned from our audience that seemed to be the one that people gravitated to the most because they liked the broad spectrum of the, arguably the extremely well-known or critically acclaimed, balanced with straight to video, shot on video, never heard of this, way obscure. I've heard of it, but I never dared to look at it. I just saw it in the video store and kept on walking. Well, now we're going to grab you by the shoulder, put you in front of it, get a sense of what it's about, and then you can make your own decisions.
It is a very good, almost like not a dictionary, that's the wrong word, encyclopedia. It's a good like general encyclopedia of horror films. And I'm still working through the list like from the 80s, just like life is lifing. But yeah, there are a lot of movies that I had never even heard of before or ignored just like during that time, but I was a kid, so.
Well, I ignored plenty of stuff. I mean, part of my evolution of making these movies is I've always said that I've got the best homework in the world. It's like, all right, I never really actually saw this. I know about it, or maybe I've never even heard of it and I know nothing about it. But someone said this is popular or cult following, check it out. So I discovered everything, many things from the 80s, and now with the 90s. I'm still discovering movies that I've never seen. Jumping ahead real quick, I'm going through some J-horror titles that I had heard of, but I had never seen. And now I'm getting to see movies like Cure, for example, I had never seen. And I was just like, oh, this is really great,
There's so much to love about horror, not only from the 80s, but also the 90s. So far, you have done In Search of Darkness, 90 to 94. Now we're going from 95 to 99. What have you found so far in your research that makes this particular era of horror unique?
Well, the first half, first of all, when people think of the 90s collectively as a decade, this is the first time, by the way, that we've decided to divide it into two pieces. We used to go 80 to 89, part two, 80 to 89, part three, 80 to 89. If it wasn't broke, we didn't fix it. Now, of course, we broke it. The idea was like, well, maybe there's not so much in the 90s, so we'll do maybe like 2-3 hour movies. But I knew that there was more to plunder, and when I did revisit the opportunities of how much we could show in the 90s, I just said everyone loves these movies if they're fans, these documentaries, because they're long, because we get to do so many things, and because we can really run the gamut of the types of quality of films and titles that you've heard and you've never heard of before. That's why, ironically, it ended up being the longest In Search of Darkness yet, and we only are halfway through the decade. But what I discovered in that first half was that I took it as a bit of a challenge, because I, like many other people, and collectively, there's always different levels of horror fans. There's no right answer. There's no gatekeeping. But many casual horror fans will say, well, the 90s, 80s were great. Horror now is great. 90s, that was good. Scream. What else? Bram Stoker's Dracula. I can't even think of anything. Candyman? I don't know. Not much comes to mind unless you're really looking at the list and looking at what's going on and paying attention. And this was a perfect fertile ground for me to take kind of a lost decade or a maligned decade, at least for the first half of it, 90 to 94, and show people, there's so much amazing stuff here. If anything, it feels like it's like the 80s cup was so runneth over that the first half of the 90s felt like the 80s party just hadn't ended. Yeah. Now we get to 95 to 99, and I think as if the film industry is a sentient being. But when you collectively look at the types of movies that come out, I think the horror filmmakers and the horror movies that show their work kind of learned that in the first half of the 90s, you really had to sort of take a look at, it got grittier, it got darker. There was that party with all the icons, Freddy and Jason, they were all there, the tall man, Chucky, but, Candyman and People Under the Stairs, there were things percolating that were about socioeconomic problems and reflections of the hangover from the 80s greed is good kind of decade. That being said, people like Wes Craven really were carving a path of meta filmmaking. And this is the answer. That's the long answer. If I gave you one word, it's meta. I think films by that point felt like, well, maybe, we're, especially in Los Angeles, where we're very attuned to the fact that there was the Rodney King beatings and the OJ trial, and there was the LA riots. There's a lot of serious stuff that I think people were trying to escape from. So it made a great opportunity for a film like Scream, which was subverting your expectations, yet still following the formula of your standard slasher, courtesy, of course, Kevin Williamson writing and Wes Craven directing. But I think by this point, the audience, the collective understanding of the horror audience was that the audience is smarter, they're savvier, and they want entertainment that has a nod and a wink and a recognition of our knowledge as an audience, especially as horror movie fans. Meta really just kind of exploded because you had that before, like Wes Craven really carving that path with, like, say, New Nightmare, which is really all about itself and the impact of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So, but now, I think people more and more were like, wait, there's something here. We can have an entertaining movie, or we can have an escapist movie go into the teen-driven disturbing behaviors, or The Craft, or I Know What You Did Last Summer. Hollywood's money, because people were going to the box office. I'm now just rambling because there's so much. This is what happens is I've got so much in my brain because there's so many movies to talk about. The answer, simplified, is part 2 of the 90s, Scream, meta, and also lots of indie film experimentation.
Yeah. And Scream, for a lot of people, seems to be the divide, like the dividing line between the early 90s and the early to mid 90s, and then also the late 90s. Mm-hmm. And
maybe coming out in 96. Sorry to interrupt, but
So 95. It was 96. Oh gosh, now you're making me feel old. I was 14 at the time that movie came out.
These movies make us all feel old when you actually realize that it's probably 10 years further, longer, prior than you realize. I still think everything is 20 to 25 years later, and it was 40 years later. And
especially when you look back at 80 films, like, oh, what? Right? And something else that was touched on In Search of Darkness 90 to 94 was the whole, speaking of dividing lines, the horror versus thriller divide. So that in 90 to 94, it was talked about that people were almost embarrassed to even call horror movies horror. So they called them thrillers because I guess the term was more palatable to studios. Do you find that also carried over into 95 to 99? Because one of my favorite movies, Seven, I still hear people to this day call it a thriller, and I think of it as a horror.
It's a horror movie through and through, and you could label it a thriller however you want to market it, Mr. Studio marketing department. I think, putting the lipstick on the pig, so to speak, in this situation is this time around, I think studios were very, very, there was a trend of strong box office, starting with Silence of the Lambs and moving forward, and Bram Stoker's Dracula. And people are realizing you can get A-list stars to do a B picture, and people would show up for it. And whatever you call it, whether you call it a horror, a thriller, or just a good effing time at the movies, the reason why movies like Scream were so influential is because they packed that with Monica from Friends is a key face in this movie, for lack of a better description.
Yeah.
They were really stacking the deck here with something that would get general audiences to the theater and not just horror fans. And so, listen, labels being labels, whatever you want to call it, this was cha-ching at the box office. The Mummy, cha-ching at the box office. Make it a Indiana Jones movie with mummy horror elements. No slow dragging foot of Boris Karloff anymore. This is like an insane adventure by Stephen Sommers. And so you put that in, and you put Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense. Lots of big names. Seven, of course, Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey, before Kevin Spacey was kind of a questionable name. James Woods and John Carpenter's Vampires. Whatever you may think of these folks now, they were the huge stars of the 90s, and they were box office draws. And that's why one of the reasons why so many people beyond just the horror contingent would go see these movies.
And there are so many movies that came out in the 90s, and it's impossible to even see them all or keep track of them all, which is why documentaries like this, I feel, are very important. They help us explore that stuff that we might have missed. In your research for 95 to 99, have you come across any movies that you may have missed or that have flown under your radar that you have now watched and are like, oh, I really appreciate that, like, more now? Or where has this been all my life?
Yeah. There's plenty, so it's always hard to pick just one. Another thing that I'm setting out to do with this edition of In Search of Darkness is to show people, like I did with 90 to 94, that there's a huge amount of really great material, really great films, indie films, even studio films that people just don't think about. Because Scream is such a strong, it overshadows because of the power and the popularity of Scream, which of course they're continuing on into Scream, 6, 7, 8, 17 right now?
Seven. It's 7 right now.
I know. I'm just being a little bit flippant.
Yeah.
But I want to show people that there's more. There's so much more. One of the films that I discovered, I always knew it existed, and it was called Cemetery Man. And I always thought that's the worst title. And Rupert Everett standing there in a cemetery on the video box, I'm just like, okay, what's he do? Big ditches? I don't think I'm interested. And I'd always find other things. But then I kept on hearing, this is before I did In Search of Darkness 95 to 99 or the 90s. But then I started hearing more and more about this movie that I got to see called Dell'amore della Morte. And I'm just like, oh, that's Italian, right? Tell me more. I want to know all about it. And I'm like, wait, Dell'amore della Morte is Cemetery Man. It's the same movie. Wait a minute. And I watched it and I just thought, oh my God, this is one of the greatest films. It feels like a leftover, like some of these do, like from the 80s. Colorful, creative, all practical effects. No CG, which was of course very prevalent at this point. In conflict or just taking over practical effects. There's so much CG at this point because so many. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of that because I did for 90 to 94. But producers were just like, ooh, you could do anything with CG, and it, maybe I think it's going to be less expensive than practical effects and less time consuming. And of course, they all found out they were wrong, and it looked terrible. But I digress. So yeah. Dell'amore della Morte, amazing film.
And you had to read the Italian title for it to pull you in this time.
Isn't that ironic that I maybe I am such a film snob that I'm like, it must have subtitles or I would not watch it.
I use subtitles even on films from the US. It's just like, now I can't live without them. They're a necessity to me now.
Yeah, I hear that. But I have to say real quick, because I did bring it up, that I will always watch a movie in the original language and read the subtitles. I have in the past tried, I remember many examples, but the one that comes to mind is Train to Busan, where I watched it and I remember the setting was for the dubbed version. And I remember I was like 5 minutes into it. I'm just like, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it, settings, hold it. And I watched it, of course, in Korean. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's amazing. And I wouldn't be able to bear watching that dubbed. Now, that's great for people who like dubbed movies. I pass no judgment. And I grew up on a steady diet of Godzilla movies where no lips were in sync for the entire film, but it didn't matter because Godzilla stomping Tokyo was in sync, and that's all I cared about.
That, or even giallo films. Sometimes the dubbing on those are horrible.
Well,
But
sometimes that's part of the charm too. But
yeah, it is.
hmm.
It definitely is. So we talked a little bit about In Search of Darkness and a little bit about how it's put together. And were there any major takeaways that you took from 90 to 94 that are going to be applied to 95 to 99? Are any segments from 90 to 94 going to make its way into 95 to 99, like TV shows?
Like TV shows, hint, hint.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I did because I did a chapter on TV shows because there were so many. It goes back to the original 80s trilogy that I did where I didn't do any television at all, just because for the simple fact that there wasn't a lot of horror television and there were so many movies to consume and to digest and discuss. That was my primary focus. But I realized as I got into the 90s, there's a lot of great horror on television. Tales from the Crypt was probably the one that said, Tales from the Crypt and the It miniseries were the two things that told me I can't ignore those in the 90s. And so I did a couple of TV movies and television shows in the first half, and I plan to continue doing that. I just won't devote a chapter to it. But don't get your hopes up if your favorite movie was already mentioned in the first half that it'll repeat in the second half, because I still have so much fish to fry in terms of the cinematic 90s universe of horror that I'll reveal now. I'm still leaving so much on the floor. This is my biggest problem as a completist and as the guy who's making these movies or these documentaries. There's never enough space, even if I want to, and then people inevitably say, why would you choose this over this? What's the logic of choosing that one over my personal favorite? That's crazy. Everyone loves this. That one's less known, or everyone loves this because it's less known. Why would you do a more popular one? And guess what? I can't win. Either way, I try and cover as much as possible to curate and integrate and reflect not only the era and the times, but also the types of people that I can get to talk about it.
Horror is such a broad genre, so it would be impossible to include every movie that came out during that time. That documentary, I don't even know how long it would be. It'd probably take us like years to watch this.
Thank you for pointing out the logic of the time that it would require to put more in. I mean, people say, well, it's 5 hours, it's 4 hours, it's 5 hours, it's 6 hours. It has to have everything. And then you look at the way it's laid out, and each segment is anywhere between, on the average, about 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. Some are 2 minutes, some are 5, or even a little bit longer. But you multiply that just mathematically by the years and by the chapters in between, you're already flying past 4 hours. And that's with making concessions that I won't include X, Y, and Z. So, listen, I'm not apologizing to anyone but myself that I wish I could bend space and time to add more in, but it's just not possible. Also, to turn these movies around in a year or less, at a certain point, we got to sort of draw the line in terms of how much we can cover, how many people we talk about. But it doesn't matter, even if we add more time mathematically, if we go with the structure, there's literally, before I even I'm going to jump ahead because you like to say, how do I make these movies? And I sit, I take a walk, I take a shower, I do some exercise. I sit at my desk staring at the paint drying, and I think to myself, what am I mathematically going to be able to do in terms of being able to fit? And I put together a list of all the movies that I think should be in there, all the things that I want to be in there, all the maybes, possiblies. There's also, when we do these interviews and the outreach process, depending on who we get, I always invite people to say if there's a movie that you love or movies you love that is not on, I give them a list to sort of jog their memory. And be like, oh, wait, I don't see blank on this list. And I'm like, oh my God, this is gold. Absolutely. We're definitely going to include that. Oh my God, now what's got to give? Something's got to give. I have all this material for this other thing, and it's a really good segment, but this is actually better because I think people have not heard of it as much, and so I mean, that's the very beginning of this outlining process, is trying to figure out what we could talk about, sort of whittling it down. Uh, Outreach to outreach meaning recruiting the talent, the interview subjects, and that's a whole tangled experience of going through representatives and agents and managers and friends are standing in front of their house hoping they'll come out and take the garbage out so you can say hi. Whatever you can do to get these folks, getting them to sit down, coordinating them to sit down either in our studio or going to their home or their studio, their office in other states and in other countries, whether it's England, Germany, New Zealand, New York, or my backyard here in Los Angeles, going to their home or coming to our studio. That it's a huge process, herding cats to get people to sit down. And once everyone's sat down, and I ask them lots of questions, not only about their own projects, but I have a whole list of things about the themes and the ideas and the important things that happened in a decade collectively, whether it had to do with film or whether it has to do with pop culture of the times. Those are all the questions that I ask collectively of everybody, in addition to let's talk about specifically your projects and how they fit in the jigsaw puzzle of the time and the influence and so whatnot. Sorry, I talk a lot. There's so much. There's so much.
No, I'm used to it by now. I would have had you come on for a third time if I wasn't used to it.
But ultimately, after I do all this stuff and I've got this, I have great tech people making sure this can happen, so I could really focus on the interview itself. Aktay Ordabasi is my cameraman and sound guy for a large portion of these shoots. Some of them, it's stringer cameras that we hire in various places who do an amazing job. We make sure that they're the right people for the job, and they'll do it. And I'll do it remotely like I am with you, but we'll do it live, and we'll have a real 4K camera there. Then, with all this footage, I have to script it beginning to end. And what I do is when I script it is basically it's transcribed with time codes. And so what I do is say for a segment, say I'm doing a Delamorte segment. Anyone who I asked about that or talked to someone from that or anyone who had thoughts about it, then I take all those bytes and I put them in a Word document, but I put it with all the time codes and I put it all together to basically tell what the movie's about, what their thoughts about are, any production experiences, anything I can add that I put these segments together to make it interesting and evolve the story when multiple people are talking about it. So someone will introduce an idea, another person will step in and evolve that idea, another person will come up with a different point of view. And next thing I know, I've got a script that all is a 3 or 4 minute segment, usually longer, and I have to cut it back begrudgingly. And because I love all this stuff and I want to put so much more, especially when there's so much more good material. But at the end of the day, this movie has to flow. It can't stop and go for 10 minutes. It could go to 20 minutes for one film alone with how much I talk with these folks. Tell me when you're extremely bored. I talk too much.
No. The creative process is very fascinating because just like I myself am a creative, and it's very much just like the way I script out my videos and like how I've got like the visuals that go with each segment of my video. It's just like it's very carefully planned out. And even I don't include everything in there. Just got to kill our darlings sometimes.
Well, exactly. And there's a lot of editing that happens that no one sees. And I'm not talking about just editing the piece. I'm talking about editing what goes, what stays.
Hey, if you're digging this episode, why don't you go ahead and hit like and subscribe? I've got more horror deep dives and episodes of Retro Horror School Talks on the way. And if you want to keep the horror going even past this episode, I'm always posting extra stuff over on Instagram and Threads. Just look for Terrorific Lady. Plus, if you're feeling generous and want to support the show, my Ko-fi link is in the description. All right, back to it.
When I put these bites together, a lot of it has to do with, you know, what I do is I have my editor, Alex Townley. I will send him the script. He comes back with it all strung together, and I watch it and I say, does this now make sense? Because when I'm doing the transcription of it, I don't have the body language. I don't have the inflections. I want to on paper it says, and they lived happily ever after, and there should be a period there. But when the bite comes back and they're like, and they lived after, and then they went this and they went into that. And I'm like, it doesn't work with me just ending it there. So you have to make even more decisions about whether to include it, add more for context. There's subtleties that up the yin yang about all this kind of stuff. But what I ultimately do, and I'm happy with the segment in its rawest form, I'll give it back to Alex. And I'll have select notes where I use this poster, use this clip, but I also don't want to literally map it out blueprint shot for shot for shot, because Alex is very, very, very much part of the creative process where I want to see what he's going to bring to the table. If he sees things that I don't see, if he could also visually show all these clips for a movie and tell a story without them also talking about it, the evolution of the beginning of the middle and the end of the film, from a viewing experience, you really get a sense of what this project has to offer and what this film has to offer. And then there's more polishing and blah, 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 blah. But then I just start again, because that's one segment. Now multiply that by 70, 75 segments plus the chapters in between, which are average anywhere between 5, 6, 10 minutes. I try and cap them at 10. Sometimes they go to 12 minutes, but the longer they are, and I want to go, there's so much good stuff. But then I'm getting past 6 hours. I'm getting into 7 hours. And we get into it just proofing it, just doing the subtitles, just the legal vetting of every single clip and every single movie poster and every single thing that they say, to make sure that this is something that we could do, or we can legally do the things we're doing. All that stuff is incredibly time consuming. And the longer the movie it is, the longer the time and the more expense it costs to do that as well, and which is a required thing that we always do. So these things are gargantuan undertakings, and even if you go past 6 hours, the media, physical media itself, a Blu-ray, a dual-layer disc, you can only include so much information on a DVD and then a Blu-ray. We only do Blu-rays now, and you got to keep the file size down of the whole kit and caboodle. So that's like the tip of the iceberg. Long, short explanation.
That there is a lot that goes into this, like more than what people see. Thanks for explaining just a little bit behind that process.
And then they say, well, why didn't you do that? And that was a stupid idea, and they shouldn't have. Clearly they didn't think about it, and clearly there are people who say this. So I'm parroting, not a lot. People love these things, and that's why I'm still doing them. So that's wonderful. But of course, we all read that one thing where they're like, really? No structure, completely disorganized? Oh my gosh, it's like the most, it's like the most rigidly structured thing you can imagine. But someone didn't see it that way. They said it's all over the map.
Yep. Creative things are always our babies. And we could have like 99 positive comments, but our brain tends to focus just like on mainly the one negative comment that's out there, and then we obsess over it because it's like, what are they seeing that I'm not seeing? And then it's like, well, just their opinion, I guess, but
Yeah.
they're wrong.
Well, I've learned to take it for with a grain of salt, but I'm the type of person who takes constructive criticism well.
Mm,
And if I see sort of a collective trend or pattern where people say, "Don't do
right,
this," why didn't they do that? They should do this next time. Everyone's got their opinion, and even if it's just one person, I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's actually something I should probably do. I like that." But also if a number of people say it, it's like, "Oh, okay, I think I need
right.
to retool a little bit because that's kind of what I did by the time I got to In Search of Darkness Part 3, the response was actually quite positive. I didn't know how people were going to respond to like the Canadian low budget things being in my movie. They're like, "Are you kidding me? That movie, it's the lowest of the low budget and it's goofy but people were just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they included that." Or they dared to include that. How cool is that?" But the big balance of really high polish studio offerings, the mid, the indie, and then the shot on video stuff, people responded very positively in Search of Darkness 3 of that nice sort of mixture, that alchemy of having all those movies represent a faction of the types of movies that we were able to consume, whether it was in the theaters or on the video store shelf. So I brought that over in Search of Darkness 90 to 94, and people responded very positively that, I think people were worried like, uh-oh, he's going to, if patterns are correct, he's going to do it like the first In Search of Darkness. It's all going to be just the really, 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 really popular mainstream stuff. And I'm like, no, definitely not going to do that. I have the opportunity to do it differently. So I will continue that recipe for part 2 of the 90s.
Oh, yes, that is so awesome to hear. It's yes, because I love hearing about the obscure stuff, the direct to video, the DIY horror that people would just shoot on their video cameras. I like hearing about the TV shows like in horror. Just like I love hearing about all of that, getting to hear just like firsthand, just like, yes, we're going to continue that. Like, I do an evil little laugh there.
There's people who have seen In Search of Darkness 90 to 94 would have discovered, or they already knew of, Annie Choi, who is the co-author of Bleeding Skull. And she is just an absolute cheerleader for backyard filmmaking and the lowest of the low budget and shot on video. And she's put herself through incredible torture watching some of these stuff, but she loves it. And she loves self-inflicting harm of watching some of these movies. And she writes about it. She's incredibly articulate. And she was such a welcome addition to part 1 that we're continuing with more for part 2, because she will single out movies that none of us have ever heard and give you the reasons why you should check it out. And so I can't wait for people to see more of her choices.
Ooh, yes, very, very exciting. And speaking of 90s horror, there's a lot to talk about, especially in terms of just how well it's aged. The shift from the analog era, like VHS, VCR, to then we're starting to get into DVD era. With all that, how well do you think that 90s horror has aged, and what have we lost and gained with the shift to like DVDs and just now even Blu-rays, but back then it was DVDs?
Yeah. Well, I think I in revisiting a lot of these movies, which I saw first run at the time, I find that they have not aged because movies at that point, you held up 7. The cinematography was slicker, the writing was slicker. Not every movie was just like a timeless film, but the thing is, the 80s really, if you look at a lot of those movies, they're so many are just a time capsule of that era with the big shoulder pads and the big hair and and even just the language and colloquialisms and stuff like that. I find the 90s doesn't feel so far away. The 90s feels like there's so many of these movies were really, really, really huge movies that resonate to this day and influence a lot of the filmmaking that we see today, horror filmmaking. A lot of the meta structure of those films back then, which were pretty fresh, are kind of widely integrated in the movies we see all the time now. Movies are constantly making over the last 30 years references to pop culture and this and that and the other thing, and we're just so used to it now. But at the time, and it wasn't the first time they had done it, but it really sort of caught on, so more movies were doing that. You have Idle Hands, and in Idle Hands you have like Seth Green with a plug-in electric knife, and he's like,
"Oh, look at me, I'm Leatherface."
And everyone knew what he was talking about. Or you have Chucky, where in Bride of Chucky, there's a kill. I won't say who or how, but nails right in the face, like from a nail gun. And then Chucky, he has this moment. He's like, "Why does that look so familiar?" Talking about Pinhead. And so you look back in these movies now, everything seems so intertwined and integrated. They don't feel very old, and with the advent of DVD, which was really at the very, very, very end, they were coming in, but they didn't really, I don't think they showed up on Blockbuster shelves until around, maybe they started creeping in around 99, but it was really 2000, 2001 that they really started saying, our DVD collection, and they were moving VHS, to the bargain bins. In order to move a movie from VHS to DVD, there's licenses involved. There's song rights that are involved. It's not just like, oh, well, we make DVDs now, so let's move it over. No, the producers have to decide they want to do it, or the distribution company. Distribution company needs to decide to do it, needs to get the permissions to do it. And if they can't do it, or they don't think it's going to sell because it's a title that they don't realize or don't care about is popular by a cult following, they're not going to do it. And as time progresses, sometimes these things never. Blood Beach is like the ideal example I like to use. That's still stuck on VHS. It never went to DVD, never went to Blu-ray. I don't even think it's on streaming. I think the only way you can get it is if you find it as a bootleg upload on YouTube. And that has to do with rights and permissions. On the flip side, having things move on to DVD, you now had, I think, the greatest thing that we all know, which kind of has disappeared. So it's weird because it's like, oh, that was great. We took it for granted. There was so much of it, but it was a novelty to have a director's commentary, to have BTS special features.
Yes.
Where, especially when all this stuff was new, it was like film school at a reasonable price that you could also fit twice as many than VHS on your shelf. That's, for me, I had a decent amount of VHS, but I never said that's going to be my library. DVD came along, and I'm like, I now need to reflect my tastes and interests and repeat viewings for all to see behind me or on my shelf or, in my living room, because they'll know that I'm a filmophile, So, yeah, I mean, it's not only just all the cool perks that we got with DVDs, but you could sort of display it like you would books on your shelf in your living room or your den, where, of course, they're for you, but it also is a reflection of who you are. And you're not going to put books on there that you don't want to reflect poorly on you.
No.
That could be embarrassing.
Speaking of all the extra goodies that DVDs offer, by the time this video comes out, the pre-order for A Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999 will be going on. What can backers or supporters expect? Like, what extra goodies will be thrown in with the I almost said DVD. Blu-ray.
Yeah, we only do Blu-ray now, but we also do we do digital packages now as well. It's a laundry list of good stuff. So all the stuff that you loved in the past, where you got like a really cool, a booklet with some behind the scenes information, and you get your. I want everyone to go to 90shorrordoc.com, 90s, 90shorrordoc.com, between May 15th through June 9th. that is when you can pre-order. It's the pre-order sale of In Search of Darkness 95 to 99. The movie will be coming out at the end of the year, unless all else fails. That's when it's expected and intended to come out. And the idea is, go to the site and you're going to see all the cool goodies you can get. You can get your name in the credits, which is of course always very cool. But compared to what we had last time, we like to mix it up, because if we have someone like you, Brandy, who really is a wonderful supporter of our stuff, you want new stuff. You don't want repeats. So if you take a look at what we've got starting on the 15th, you'll see that there are some new goodies. We mix it up a little bit. Of course, the new posters. We have an amazing new poster by Dave Morrell, who has done ever since In Search of Darkness Part 2, Dave Morrell has done the amazing artwork for us. Of course, we also always have the alternative kid with the characters all around it by Clayton Benge, our art director, our creative director, who does an amazing job. Just today, I saw the brand new poster that he does. It's completed as of today. I won't say anything more, but I think it's a perfect evolution from 90 to 94, now to 95 to 99. It's a little bit different, but it's what you love and expect from him. It's super cool. I think it's great, and I think the fans are going to love it, and they're just going to say, oh man, now I got to move something to make way for it. That's what I did.
Yeah, I still have to find frames and just like kind of crowd my wall space to like fit like all these posters that I still have yet to hang on my wall.
I'll add, just the stuff that you love. It's all quality stuff, and we've evolved into this. The packaging is just so good. It's so enviable. I mean, me as a fan who loves physical media, I'd be like, oh my God, this is quality stuff, whether it's reversible inlays, whether it's slip covers, whether it's a 2-disc set, or whether we take what we're going to do now, of course, for those who might not have gotten 90 to 94, we've got a case where if you already got part 1, you got a case that you could buy literally and just buy part 2, and now you can put the 2 in together like we did for the trilogy that you held up. Imagine that, but just for part 1, for the 2 parts of In Search of Darkness 90s, and lots of goodies.
All right, and before we
and listen, sorry, I say let's move on in my brain.
Yeah.
Wait, there's more. We did like a really cool certificate that I think people really responded to, and so you get that. We'll evolve that into something different. But I think people, above all else, really like the cool collectible elements and the perks and like the limited number cards, whatever we're putting in there. We try and make this really, really special and justify what we're asking for it, because we're an independent company. So you get a really long movie and you get the ultimate swag gift when it's ready to ship.
We horror fans love our collectibles. That seems just to be the one commonality among all us horror fans. It's like we like our little things.
Prep your unboxing videos ahead of time.
Yes, exactly. And the certificate makes me feel like I graduated.
Yeah, I like it, right? Yeah. Recognize your outstanding participation to help preserve horror history. Yeah. That's not an exaggeration, because that's kind of what these documentaries are. They're time capsules, talking about a decade gone by, 30 years, 40 years on, and the people who are still around to talk about it are telling brand new tales and familiar anecdotes that we love, but in a different way or a different context with recontextualization. I think it's pretty cool stuff that you could also pass along to the next generation who's trying to discover all of these amazing horror films.
Absolutely.
Curation,
yes. Nostalgia curator, horror curator. There we go. But before we head into the retro lightning round, what is one thing that you hope people will take away when 95 to 99 finally comes out? What's one thing you hope they'll take away after watching it?
I think in comparison to the part 1 of the decade, that they'll realize that there was more than they ever realized. The shadow of Scream is quite intimidating in the best way possible. And if you say 90s and you pick one movie, it's Scream, maybe Blair Witch Project. But I'm talking about the average person, they only think of like one movie that defines a decade, but there's obviously so much more at the varying levels that I've already discussed. And so I think when you see this film, you realize, oh yeah, of course there's these great movies and it's fun to revisit them, but I forgot about that. I didn't know about that. I didn't know this person did this. I didn't know, that Doug Bradley did this really obscure, weird Spanish filmmaker horror movie, with the star of Return of the Living Dead 3, like what? I never knew that. I got to check this out now. Killer Tongue? Killer Tongue? What's that? He champions it and he loves it. And boy, that's the joy for me is when, of course, I sit down with Doug Bradley to primarily talk about Hellraiser, but any opportunity for him to talk about his favorites or something that means a lot to him, where he's like, I'll trumpet this one from the rooftops because not a lot of people know about it. It gives me pride to be able to share it with people and his enthusiasm,
Yes. Horror's just neat. Like that meme from The Simpsons where Marge is like,
I just think they're neat.
when I think about horror, I think it's just neat. All right, so now we're going to head to the retro lightning round. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Rapid fire, just go with your gut, whatever the first answer pops in your head. All right, so your absolute favorite horror movie from 95 to 99.
Oh, God, don't make me choose. I'll currently today choose From Dusk Till Dawn.
From Dusk Till Dawn. Good choice. Good choice. And it may be different tomorrow.
It's going to be different if you ask me a second time.
Favorite horror movie? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. What do you feel is the most underrated horror movie from this era?
Well, I did mention Delamore de la Morte, a.k.a. Cemetery Man, but I'll also say Cube, Vincenzo Natali's Cube. Have you ever heard of Cube?
I have heard of Cube.
Have you seen Cube?
I have seen it just like once, and so if I watch it again, it's going to be like I've seen it for the first time.
It's an amazing movie. It's an amazing indie Canadian production. I think more people need to discover it. I am very privileged to have Vincenzo Natali in this movie coming up. I'm not going to reveal too many talent yet, but I can't. Listen, no one's doing this to me, so I might let a couple come out. Anyway, Vincenzo, having him in this movie talking about that, and he's such a great filmmaker. If you haven't seen, it's not in the 90s, but he did a follow-up. One of his follow-ups is a movie called Splice that Guillermo del Toro produced.
Oh, that movie is wild.
Yes, it's so good. With Sarah Polley and Adrian Brody.
Adrian Brody, yeah.
Oh, it's so good. So Vincenzo Natali is like kind of talk about underrated. Cube is amazing. Splice is amazing. You can just take those 2 movies and say, whoa, this guy needs to be better known and better employed. But he's actively employed, so I don't need to show for a job for him.
And last question, you're going to fill in the blank. Late 90s horror was blank.
Dope. It was okay. I say that because I'll let the cat out of the bag for one more. I just interviewed Emily Bergel, the star of The Rage, Carrie Part 2. And what I really enjoyed, I think that's another underrated one as well.
Yes.
Because I think people, including myself at the time, dismissed this as like, well, The Rage, Carrie 2. I don't even see Sissy Spacek, or she doesn't even look like her. I don't know. I did that. But when I eventually saw that movie, I said, this is a really, really, really well done film. And she is amazing at it. And so she was very kind enough to sit down with me, and we talked about it. And one of the elements when I did a rewatch right before I talked to her was like, there were a couple 90s slang words that she just throws out there that I was like, wow, that she just said that, and she stood by it as saying she was actually the one who kind of brought it to the table, and it wasn't even in the script. But it's a great movie. It's a great interview with her, and so that era, to reflect just the time period, was dope.
It makes me so happy to hear that. Not only do you think late night horror is dope, but that movie is in there because it is absolutely one of my favorites, and I have championed that movie so many times, kind of like I did with The Hitcher, and I will just keep championing it some more. But that's a tale for another time. So what I want to wrap this up with is, David, as always, a blast having you come on here and talk about horror, 90s stuff, In Search of Darkness, which, again, as of the time of this video coming out, is on pre-order now from May 15th to June 9th. You said people can go to 90shorrordoc.com to find out more, but where are you lurking on social media?
These days, I spend a lot of time on Blue Sky. You can find me at David Weiner at Blue Sky. Blue Sky has this long kind of name that I forget what it's called. But if you
I forget it too.
But I'm still on Twitter. I'm on Instagram as It Came From Blog. I still have my site, itcamefromblog.com. You can find It Came From Blog on Facebook. So It Came From Blog is on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I'm on Threads, but I don't spend much time there. The problem is there are just too many places, and got people to see and things to do. But you'll find them probably most responsive on Blue Sky these days.
Okay. And also, people who want to find out more about the In Search of Darkness 90s on social media can also go to its 80s horror doc, because it's under the 80s horror doc banner. I remember you saying just like that, what was it, that account exploded, so it just made sense to just keep it.
If we wanted to do at 90s horror doc, which makes complete sense, we'd have to start from scratch with our followers and the base, and it just doesn't make sense. And when we did, when Robin Block wrote it, 80s horror doc, for in what 2000, it's so far away. I'll do a documentary about it in 2018. Who knew we were going to still be moving on to the 90s, and who knows what's next. So yes, check us out on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, X, and
everywhere.
You can find us at 80s horror doc.
Yeah. And, so if you're looking for 90s horror doc, you're not going to find it. You have to search under 80s horror doc. So.
Indeed. Yeah. And tell all your friends. Everyone says, "Oh, I would have gotten this if I knew about it." So I'm imploring everyone to spread the word. If you like these documentaries, if you're interested, if you listen to Brandy talking about all these kinds of movies, these are all encapsulated in the 80s ones and now the 90s ones. And so most definitely, word of mouth is incredibly important. A movie like Sinners, which is out right now, that movie is exploding and doing really, really well, of course, because it's a great movie. But word of mouth is really what's propelling it to amazing box office, because people know a good thing when they see it.
Yeah, everybody. So show your support to some great documentaries that are time capsules of, like, if you're looking for the 80s, like, yes, but then also support the 90s. So thank you, everybody out there, for watching this very fun episode of Retro Horror School Talks. Like and share this episode with everybody you know, maybe people you don't know. Just share it with everybody. And please subscribe if you have not already, if you want to learn more about horror and listen to fun horror conversations. Class is dismissed. I'll see you next time. Bye.